documentation on the cemetery is not nearly what any good member would like, good member of the Old Mission Peninsula Historical Society. But we do have a little information for you, which I'm happy to share. And if a couple of you who are more mobile than I am would care to pass these out, I'll keep one, I think.
Oh, this is good.
Thank you. Thank you. Parmalee Cemetery. That's the same place as the Lakeside. The reason, as you'll see from the first piece of paper that you got, the township map, there's a slight joining of the one end of the cemetery here with Bagley Lake, which is over that away. So it is legitimately Lakeside Cemetery. We had never known why my grandfather elected to be buried at the other cemetery, because he didn't found that one or register it, but he's there, and we sometimes wondered if it might have been a matter of wives. My grandfather, William David Bagley, first wife was Margaret Parmalee, and this, as I said, had been called the Parmalee Cemetery, but for some reason unknown to us, he was not buried here, he was buried there. My grandfather was active in the Grange, and the Grange is still represented by the rickety old building, which used to be the Hill Grocery Store, which is now a boarded-up building along Sweeney Road, or Sweeney Road, depending on your generation. The cemetery is not very much occupied here. You're getting two of us for the price of one. The other one that you're getting is Michael Kilmary. Michael is a fourth-generation native of the Old Mission Peninsula, and he has several things that are very valuable to the little old Lakeside Cemetery. One, he has been trained as a surveyor. Two, he was the township sexton for the other township cemeteries. And three, he is an outstanding historical researcher and has straightened out a great deal about what is and what is not true about this cemetery, because it's been rife with rumors. We had heard repeatedly from lots of good friends and neighbors who are natives that there were any number of people who were buried here without benefit of gravestones, because during the Depression they had to be buried, but nobody had any money, so they just buried them here anyway. And that is either not true at all, according to Michael's research, or is only true in one or two cases. Because Michael has been able to trace all the other graves, the gravestones, and the records, including in the Oakwood Cemetery in Traverse, who is buried where. There are three township cemeteries, as most of you know. At one time, a lot of people thought that this was a fourth township cemetery. In fact, my Aunt Catherine Bagley Marshall thought that she had given the cemetery to the township 30 or 40 more years ago. And then more recently, somebody else actually looked at the facts, and it was ours rather than the township's. But in addition to ours that was or was not a township cemetery, there's the Ogdensburg, with which we're all familiar, the Bohemian, with which I think we're all familiar, and also the latest and newest is the, I think they call it the Old Mission Cemetery, don't they?
They call it Willie Torrey's
Peninsula Cemetery, thank you, on Peninsula Drive. There's an amazing number of, I'm surprised always to think of this whole cemetery as being about an acre inside, only an acre. But it turns out that there's an awful lot of arithmetic that piles up bodies pretty fast. It turns out that each grave plot will hold 10 individual grave sites. And on the larger of the two pieces of paper, you can see where each of the grave sites is located. So when you count 10 for each one of those unfilled grave sites, there are well over 700 places where people can still be buried, which is by far the majority of the sites available. I'm not suggesting that this is a bonanza or a gold mine, which it is not. But it does happen that the Peninsula Township, for the 3 township cemeteries that it does own, has raised the fee for one burial, if one is a resident, to $500, and to $750 if one is not a resident. So if you multiply 700 or 800 available grave sites times $500 or $750, either way, it adds up to around $500,000 worth of gross value in the cemetery. We're not counting our roses until they're hatched, but it has some value, and some of you have already known that we are reluctantly going to be selling the cemetery, not because we want to, it's having been in the family quite a while, but there's no one in the family in succeeding generations after mine that has the slightest interest in keeping the cemetery going, even though everybody agrees it ought to be kept going. So we're going to have to sell it to someone outside of the family who is equipped to maintain the cemetery and to operate it. We get occasional calls from people who would like to get one of the burial sites, and so far we've just postponed those inquiries because we want to clean it up a little more and have it in better condition before we start adding any residents here. But eventually we will open it up if we haven't sold it before we open it up. In fact, today, by odd coincidence, I had a call from a fellow who's in the cemetery business, and he has called me every 3 months forever saying, well, am I ready to sell the cemetery now? And I put him off again this time until Thanksgiving time. A word about my grandfather since he started this. His first wife I had mentioned was Margaret Parmalee. The second wife was the reason we were connected to Pratts and the Bagleys and lots of other folks, because the second wife was Emma Pratt Bagley, and she was the mother of 4 children of that generation, the oldest of which was Mary Rosecrans Bagley, who never married. Second was my father, Edward Harbridge Bagley. Third was John J. Bagley, my father's younger brother, and Catherine Bagley Marshall. So between the Pratts and the Marshalls, we feel honorably connected to a number of the old-time families on the peninsula. Grandfather Bagley was somewhat of, he thought, a real estate operator, and for a while he did well. He owned several hundred acres of land around here before he married Miss Parmalee. But things did not go well for a lot of people, as we know all too well, in the Depression. And he lost all of his property in the Depression around 1931 and 32. The reason that Michael Kilmer is here is that he knows a lot about the cemetery that I don't know. And if any of you would care to ask him questions, he said that he's not a public speaker, but...
Well, I'm definitely not.
But we did say that we wanted him to answer questions if you have questions. And so let's just start the questioning now if you like.
Well, could I interject just a little bit?
Please.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very good presentation. Guys, have you been in the cemetery here before? Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to start out. These are the Shepherdleys over here. He was the first doctor in Grand Traverse County. He established the first hospital in Grand Traverse County on Old Mission Peninsula. If you're familiar with the house that Mr. Kelly just torn down, that was owned by the Reichmans, that was the first hospital in Grand Traverse County. There's our first doctor. We're going to move down to...
What was his last name, Mike?
Riker.
No.
Shetterly.
Shutter?
Uh-huh.
S-C-A?
S-C-H. Well, you can go over and read it. if you want.
Okay, oh, we get to go to her. Okay.
But he was not a military veteran. In World War I, his nephew took his name and joined the Army, and he was underage. And that's why there is not a flag on that marker. But they went back in the records when Orson Parker, veteran. No, not him. But what he was is our first stagecoach driver out here. In the summer, he drove stagecoach from Old Mission to Traverse City, waited, and then brought people back. In the wintertime, and this is recorded in his obituary, in the wintertime, he drove a cutter, a snow sleigh.
What era was that, Mike?
He died in 1930. He, amongst other things, was one of our earliest township clerks. You guys want to be here all night? I can keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. Now, I can start pulling out maps and showing you history and everything else, but Mr. Parmley, okay, we're going to go back, and I'm just going to kind of wave this around and point at different things. We're looking at 1856 to 1861, right? Mr. Parmley comes in and buys out everybody. And that is now what's known as Ridgewood, but he bought all the way from the government property where the lighthouse is. He bought all the way through here, all the way to Old Mission Point, and owned it. Wow. Now here comes the fun part. His daughter marries a Stanton. Well, who was he? Anybody remember their Civil War? Okay.
I don't think anybody knows.
Thank you. Everybody knows Stanton was our chief of the military. His daughter marries into Washington. His granddad sells 640 acres over on West Bay and marries the other daughter. Now, this is not scandal, okay? But I can show you on the maps how this is how the Bagleys got here.
Oh.
Do you guys know about Old Mission Harbor and the docks? Anybody familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. I backed 37 Chevrolet pickup out there to that cherry boat, creaking and droning and carrying on.
Okay. The Old Mission docks at Hazerat were owned originally by Mr. Parmley. When Mr. Parmley passes, W.D. Bagley takes over the docks and is responsible for shipping all the cherries. We had docks at Bars Harbor. Those were principally at the beginning for potatoes and apples. We had one other set of docks on the Walker property. Is anybody familiar where? Buy a map. Anyway, original telephone directory, or out here, you would find W.D. Bagley, Old Mission Docks. They were the major movers and shakers out here when it came to transporting cherries to Leelanau to Chicago. Iron ore came through here. His family. They ran the docks and then down. Okay. Now I'm probably going to bore you guys because I can, like I say, I can go for 4 or 5 hours just on.
Where were the Walker docks?
And wasn't there number one? I think so.
Yeah, where was the Walker dock?
Let me start pulling maps for you.
Yeah.
And start this baby. Okay, the Walkers owned directly across from this harbor right here. So when they would not sail out and around, it was taken directly from the dock. And you see the dock right there? It was taken from that dock to the Walkers and there across, if the weather was too bad. If it didn't go around the point, it went across.
Is that between Swaney Road and Old Mission Road?
And that's why it's called Walker Woods. I didn't know that, did you?
I was just wondering whether
Walker Woods. Yeah, but I did.
Now, one other thing, there were 4 people who started the Old Mission Historical Society. And God bless Walter, and God bless Mrs. Hooper, and I'm the only one left.
Oh.
So, when you guys actually read me to find out where you came from, I'm a nut about history out here.
I can tell.
Yeah.
Now, when we get down to the Parmley at the end, you're welcome to walk all of this if you get down to the end, you will find the Parmley lot, and you will find the name Margaret Bagley, and that was his grandfather's first wife. This originally started out as a family cemetery, and then turned into a Grange cemetery. Every person who's buried in here, every person who's on my cemetery map was a member of the Grange. The Grange was a subsidiary of the main Grange out of Pomona, Michigan. There were the town hall was a Grange hall associated with the Grange out here. Now the building that is what's called the Hill Store was originally the Grange hall. And they sold it to the Hills, Pearl and Pearl, who were buried over here. At one time, you know where the post office is now? That was originally a Maccabee Hall. But the Grange, who all these people, including the Bagleys, associated with, ran to the Maccabees until they built that, and unfortunately it burned. Okay, I'll go to questions. I'm talking too much.
How many burials do you have recorded here?
I have 13.
13.
I have 2 suspected.
I mean, 2 possible.
2 others.
2 others
No.
that you haven't investigated.
I've investigated. I can't find it.
Can't find any.
But my whole problem is, and I'm the one who straightened out Ogdensburg, I'm the one who straightened out Bohemian, I'm the one directly responsible for getting perpetual care for the cemeteries out here by the sale of lots. I can find anybody in a coffin, but if they're buried in a shroud, I can't find them. And I think my 2 over here were probably buried in shrouds. And they're registered as being buried at Ogdensburg. They're not there. And there's no stones for them. But on the township records, it says they're there. I think
Do you have their names?
I think somebody told me they remembered a couple of wooden.
I remember as a kid,
Yep.
2 wooden stones.
Right, where I s-
Wooden plaques.
Right
over
where I say
On
too.
that side, yeah.
But I think they're
And
buried
I
in
remember
shrouds,
thinking I should
not
write
in
down those
coffins.
names, but you know, you're a kid.
And if they're in
At
coffins,
13,
I can
14
find them
years
if they're in
old, and you're
shrouds. I
interested in other
can't.
things. Yeah, you didn't get back to it, so. I just still, I still feel on it,
Yeah,
you know, that I
I've only
didn't.
got 2.
It just,
If they're there, I'd actually have to dig up their ones. Because I can't find them. Okay,
Is this still zoned as a cemetery? The famous zoning laws out here? All up to date?
Another question over here.
I got a question here. I'm looking at the map and I see what looks like an entrance to the cemetery. Are we at that
You are
entrance point now?
exactly at that point.
That's it, okay.
I actually had measured it from the center of the road. This is where the entrance is. This is where the road then ran around the cemetery.
So at this point somewhere, there's a circular road starts.
Right. It runs just as you see on the map. Now what's interesting, and I'm going to start running my mouth again, is the map that you folks have versus the one I have with the big ink splotch on